I think having the book tied into a holiday has really helped in that sort of sense. A great place to set up for me this past season was like farmers markets, I guess you could call them, or like pumpkin patches even. So just going there and saying, I got this book related to Halloween. We donated $1 for every copy sold to a local chapter of Big Brothers Big Sisters. So being able to have that partnership and, stamp of approval, credibility from a reputable organization like that helps these places really attach to the project, I think.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 420 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. And in today's episode, I have an interview with Jacob of JJ McFaull. Now, JJ McFaull is the author/illustrator of Where Pumpkins Go After Halloween, which is a debut picture book released in September 2024. Now, under this pen name of JJ McFaull, Jacob, who is the author, and James, his father and illustrator, combined their passions for storytelling and art to create memorable books for young readers. The second book in their holiday series is scheduled to release this fall, but in the meantime, I was so glad I had a chance to sit down with Jacob and chat about this fantastic book, Where Pumpkins Go After Halloween. And that's coming up later in this episode. But first, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by the Podcast Guest Playbook, turning conversations into connections and community. Now, the book is written by Maddie Dalrymple and me, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In this book, you can step behind the mic with veteran podcasters, Maddie and myself, and discover how strategic podcast guest appearances can transform your creative career. Learn how to build an engaged community, learn how to forge authentic connections, learn how to spark unforgettable conversations. Master the art of story-driven interviews, from shaping magnetic talking points to delivering audio that sounds studio sharp, even from your home office. Now, in the Podcast Guest Playbook, you'll find step-by-step guidelines, you'll find real-world examples, and a downloadable playbook for planning, pitching, and promoting, the 3 Ps there, every appearance. Now, whether you're an author, an entrepreneur, or a creative professional, this guide's going to show you how to turn free airtime into lasting impact with no expensive gear or PR team required. And you can check that out over at bookstoread.com/podcastguestplaybook. I'm going to bypass comments for this episode because, again, I really want to get this out the door. I'm behind in so many things. The road trip was absolutely phenomenal. Steve and I had a blast. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode, which was Steve and I, just as we were getting towards the end of our tour together. I had that little conversation, and I hope you enjoyed that. But again, I'm so behind in so many things that I needed to get done, because I was getting some things done while on the road. But again, I spend a lot more time working during my normal days. So even just the 1 or 2 hours in the morning that I was doing work on in the early morning hours before we went on to the next day's festivities or the road trip wasn't enough to get caught up. So I was chatting with someone, actually it's for an interview, a forthcoming interview of somebody who works with authors on branding and social media. And I was embarrassed to admit, oh yeah, Sometimes when a book is released, I barely even mention, oh yeah, I had a new book come out today. And that's kind of what happened. A new book came out, the podcast guest playbook. And Maddie and I, we discussed this back in November. We worked on it. We put it all together. She did a lot of the heavy lifting on this book, and we did the back and forth before the editing happened. But we finished the work on that almost a month and a half before the release date. And so it's almost like, because that was a project, not quite like traditional publishing, but that was a project that we worked on so long ago, when it finally comes out, I'm already moved on to the new things. And I guess that's a challenge that we have in the author community. But you know what, looking back at it now, because I've given it about a month where I haven't actually looked at it regularly, I'm actually proud. I'm very proud of the work that we did. And Maddie and I met through podcasting. That's how our friendship blossomed. And this is the second co-authored book that we've done. We did a book on short fiction called Taking the Short Tack, which was prompted by Maddie asking a really good question on this podcast, on an early episode of this podcast. So I did a special episode based on what she was looking for. And then she said, hey, you know what would be cool? Let's do this thing. And I love that. I really love the way that Maddie reaches out and asks for things, and has built a career by reaching for the ring, and I really admire that. Anyways, always a fantastic time to talk with Maddie. Now, I was also on the Indie Author podcast just a few days ago, and what I think I was going to do, and I think I have to check to see, did I ask Maddie, could I play clips of that on this podcast, or am I just going to have her come back on my podcast? I can't remember. I wanted to reduce, reuse, recycle the content. So I'll double check with Maddie on that. But I will have a link, of course, to the Indie Author podcast. There's the YouTube video as well as the main podcast feed. Links which you'll find in the show notes over at starkreflections.ca. I am now on a deadline I'm working on a catalog with my consulting with Draft to Digital, print color catalog of indie author books that I'm going to be displaying and presenting and sharing with librarians in Philadelphia at the end of the month at the American Library Association annual conference, the ALA conference. I, as an author, have been a member of ALA for the past few years, and that's part of me wanting to support the public library systems. I truly believe in the value for authors in particular, of what value the library brings, not just to the community, but to authors themselves. And so I wanted to be a part of that. And so this will be my first ALA. I'm pretty excited about the experience. And I'll also be speaking at a panel, I think, that's run on behalf of the Independent Book Publishers Association. So these are not indie publishers, but micro presses and small presses in the U.S. that are traditional publishers, but smaller operations, but all done in the traditional way. And so I'll be on a panel with 3 other amazing folks from that area of the industry, obviously talking about the value of libraries, etc. But in any case, I am going to stop with the personal update so that I can hit the stop button, so I'm no longer recording, and then I can go back and edit and cut out some of my ums and ahs and things like that, add the little bumper thingies in, and then get this episode out the door. So, without further ado, I'm going to roll ye old bumper, and you're going to hear this conversation that I had with Jacob, the Jacob of JJ McFaull, and the awesome book, the awesome children's book, Where Pumpkins Go After Halloween. Because I know you're dying to know that. Actually, we don't get into it at all. But it is a really fun book. And if there's a young person in your life, you may want to check it out. Of course, there'll be links in the show notes. Thanks so much. Let's roll that bumper. Hey, Jacob. Welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thank you for having me, Mark. Super exciting.
Yeah, was super exciting is how I felt when I saw the book cover of your book. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about that. So before we get into the book, before we get into the process of writing and publishing and all those things, is that something that you've always wanted to do, is be a writer, or is that something that came along later on?
No, something I've always wanted to do. Like even before I knew really, I think that you could do it as a career. As a kid, like my parents still have a collection of some of the stories I would just come up with at the kitchen table before I knew how to spell, before I knew anything, you know. So I think it was something intrinsic.
Okay. And so Toronto Indie Author Conference is where we met in April
Yeah.
of 2025. And was that, had you gone to that before? Was that your first writers conference, or have you been going to various ones over the years?
I sort of got more involved in like the industry just 2024, so only for
Okay.
about a year.
All right.
Before that, I was trying to get my book, which you saw traditionally published.
Okay.
Had it finished for a few years, and nobody picked it up. So finally, just decided to get it out there
Right.
as best I could. And so that involved going to some more those community sort of events. But in terms of conferences, no, I haven't been to many. I'm a member of or a friend, I guess, technically, of CanScape, which is the Canadian
Yeah.
Children's Author Society.
Yeah, cool.
So I attended their big conference last year in the fall, and then this indie one was a good time too.
Well, so tell me about Canscape because I have never been. So about the organization and like how you found out about it, and then again, what were your impressions of the conference?
Yeah, I think it's pretty well known in the children's author community in Canada. I don't even remember who told me about it.
Right.
But I think they have about 800 members at this point
Okay, cool.
across Canada. They do monthly meetings. It is a great resource, I would say, for
Well, fantastic.
children's authors and people
Yeah.
getting started. Um, yeah, so they host monthly meetings with an expert. We'll present on something different every month. And it's just a great place to meet people too in the
Oh,
industry.
cool. So is it, I mean, I know you've got a children's picture book, a storybook, but does
Mhm.
it like for young reader, people who write for young readers and young adults as well, or is there a certain
Yeah,
age cutoff that they have?
yeah, I would say the cutoff's about young adult
Okay,
for
I mean that
CanScape, but
makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
they also actually they do illustrators as well. Illustrators are members too.
Oh, of course, that would make complete sense because yeah, that is
Yeah,
a great place for people to connect and stuff. But you did not have to meet your illustrator. So let's get into a huge fan of skulls and Halloween and anything kind of
yeah,
spooky. So, where do pumpkins go after Halloween? Jacob, where do pumpkins go after Halloween? So that is the title of your book, right?
that is.
Yeah. So,
I think yeah, the title,
yeah.
it turned out to be something, you know, really happy with because people ask me that question all the time. I say, well, you got to flip through the book, you got to read it. It's the perfect response.
Yeah. So the inspiration behind that, so where did the story idea come up? Did it actually occur around Halloween time when the idea came to you?
Yeah, yeah, just seeing pumpkins left out on the curb after Halloween sort of sparked the idea for the story,
Okay.
and yeah, put it together after that.
So I have to say, so for any parents or anyone who's thinking about, is this an appropriate book for my child? I did get purchased a copy that you graciously signed
Yeah,
for my granddaughter, and who's only 6 months old right now. But again, the book collection is starting because Grandpa Mark is gonna definitely be getting books for her. It is not a sad story because I get sad. I see jack-o'-lanterns and pumpkins after Halloween. I was like, oh my, there's just this beautiful magical thing is suddenly. But your
yeah,
story is a little bit it's uplifting, isn't it?
yeah. I think so. I think it does. It does. Have its moment. Hopefully, at least
Yeah.
I think
Well,
it
you,
does.
you can't have the
Touch those
triumph
nerves.
without some trials, right?
Exactly. Yeah, but of course, it's a happy ending. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, well, that's good. Good. Always good. Always good to have that hopeful, happy ending. Kids need that more
yeah,
more than ever before, of course.
exactly.
So we had mentioned you did not need to find an illustrator. So did you illustrate this book yourself?
No, actually, my dad's the illustrator. We're an author illustrator duo.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
mhm, yeah, yeah. We've been working together since since I was like 4 years old. He's been
Really? So was that like you were
illustrating
coming
my
up with
stories.
stories? So is your dad an illustrator, or is this sort of a side thing for him?
He's always been an artist. He studied illustration at Sheridan,
Okay.
and sort of same thing with me as in writing. Like as a kid, it was a passion early on.
Okay.
Um, and he does have a full time office job in Toronto, but he's been doing art on the side his whole life.
Oh
So
man. So is this his first publication as well?
he's been in magazines. Don't remember some of the names of them right now, but yeah, he's done lots of magazines. But for in terms of children's books or books in general, this is his first.
This
Yeah.
is his first. Cool. Yeah, so he's done like some commercial art, I guess, for I imagine various magazines and stuff.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So this is so how did that happen? Was it sort of because you had this partnership? Well, let's go back to it because you wrote the story. Let's go
Mhm.
back to the origin and how this book got published. You wrote the story. You knew you wanted to write. Was it mostly children's literature that you're writing?
Um, in terms of JJ McFaull, like that's going to be me and my dad. Yeah, children's
So
literature.
JJ McFaull
Um,
is the team of the two of you. Well,
it's a team.
is
His name's
his
James. Yeah.
Jacob and James. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's a great pseudonym. So it's the two of you together. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Because even on the cover, it's just JJ McFall. It doesn't say illustrated by. It's JJ McFall is this entity of the two of you. I love that.
Exactly. Exactly. But myself as a writer, like I've liked to write longer form stuff, and I write short stories.
Yeah.
Again, nothing that's traditionally published
Right.
or even self-published right now. But we're working together, JJ McFall, on a middle grade story right now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we'll shop that one around for a bit. But if nothing comes out of it, then we will self-publish that one eventually too.
So is that what you did? So you initially were looking for a publisher for this book, and how long did you sort of go through that process before you said, or before you learned, oh my God, I can take the reign and do this
Yeah,
myself.
yeah, probably about a year and a half it was finished for. And we sent
Okay.
it around. And then yeah, I didn't want to wait through another Halloween season, obviously, because it's a seasonal book, right? So if
No,
you
yeah, for sure.
miss the jump, you got to wait a whole year.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so then you guys did when did you actually release it? Was it just recently?
Yeah, 2024, we released it end of September. Hmm.
So obviously it was available for Halloween. And so how did
Yeah,
you who did you approach or what was the approach that you took? Because obviously there's a lot of self-pub tools that are really, really geared towards novels and text-based and not
yeah.
so much. What did you use? How did you logistically self-publish this book?
So it's published through Amazon, of course, and Ingram Spark as well, which allows it to be distributed
Yep.
to bookstores across the world.
Yeah.
Um, and I actually we contracted out some of the nitty gritty work in terms of like formatting,
Okay, so
just to
like a
make sure.
designer for the layout and everything. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, we just found some great people on Fiverr actually who were able to do it
Really?
at a reasonable price. And yeah, and one tip I would recommend for self-published children's authors that I think a lot of them sometimes miss is the importance of that text art on the title. I think it's so important on a
Yeah.
children's book. And my dad, he's a great artist, but he's not great with text art. It's like its own specific skill.
Right.
So I would say if you're a self-published author and your illustrator isn't comfortable with that, then that's something you should definitely look for online and invest in a good text art person.
So that was the a designer that you had hired who added the
Mm,
text to the image, not just like overlaying, right? Because they
yeah,
got to pick the fonts and they've got to pick the style and it's got to be readable. I
yeah,
think maybe for users, if you can maybe provide me with a few sort of screenshots of examples of the text, maybe I can post them at starkreflections.ca so we people can see what we're talking about, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, like we have an early copy of the book that we just printed to just see how it looked before the
Yeah.
text art was on there.
Oh.
And the title, it just seems to pop so much more
Oh,
once you
cool.
have that
Would you be able
professional.
to show the before and after? I think that'd be great for people to see.
Yeah,
Hey, look at the benefit. Like, here's the professional quality, and here's the first
totally.
try. Okay, cool, right?
Yeah,
Because authors know this. First draft
yeah,
isn't always the final one.
yeah,
I shouldn't.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. Awesome, awesome. So you're working on a young reader. So are you using either Ingram or Amazon for the print copies, or are you going with like a local printer since being in Canada, the shipment and stuff like that can be expensive?
I'm looking into the local printers this year.
Okay.
But last year printed with Amazon for, copies that I would sell at, fairs and
Right,
on
yeah.
consignment and whatnot. And it was actually a pretty good system.
Yeah.
With Amazon, sometimes if you're ordering a bunch of author copies, I would say like 10% of them sometimes for children's books at least are poor quality. Like you
Right,
wouldn't be
right.
able to, yeah. So a bit
And
of
are
a sunk
they
cost there.
do they do color printing in Canada so you don't have to pay for shipping from the States, or is that still something done in the US?
No, they're printed in Bolton,
Bolton.
Ontario.
So okay, that is a benefit because I know I can get author copies of black and white interior books
Right.
from Bolton, and it's a lot faster
Yeah.
and way cheaper. So
Yeah.
that's good news. But again, yeah, that quality because they're trying to rush things out the door. They don't always do the quality check on anything you order from them. Not just
Yeah.
print books. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about the in-person fairs because. We know, especially in the indie author space, a lot of the advice, because you were at a conference and 90% of the advice applied to novels and adult
Yeah.
text-based. But a lot of the stuff that, especially with children's books, and I know this from experience when my kid was
Hmm.
little, he wanted physical copies. He wanted the tactile experience. So you're doing in-person stuff. What are the kinds of fairs that you're doing, and how have you approached that sort of marketing?
I think having the book tied into a holiday has really helped in that sort of sense.
Yeah.
But I work full time in like community engagement. So that's sort of like going out, door knocking, partnership kind of
Okay.
role doesn't really intimidate me.
Yeah.
So yeah, just trying to get out there as much as possible, going to my local, you know, a great place to set up for me this past season was like farmers markets, I guess you could call them, or
Yeah.
like pumpkin patches even.
Of course.
So just going there and saying I got this book related to Halloween. We donated $1 for every copy sold to a local chapter of Big Brothers Big Sisters.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, being able to have that partnership and stamp of approval, credibility from a reputable organization like that helps these places really attach to the project, I think.
Oh, that's wonderful. And so, yeah, I guess with the seasonality, I mean, again, it was April. I saw your cover and I like jumped on it, right? It's like, oh my God, that's my thing. Because I'm the only one who celebrates all year round, apparently.
Yeah,
But I can even imagine that even in summer fairs and stuff like that, people are gearing up for stuff. Because I mean, again, we have to. Fortunately, my wife's going to be going to visit the granddaughter in a few weeks, so it's kind of like, okay, got some books for you to take. Otherwise,
right.
I'd be mailing them across the country. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, I'm always surprised a little bit when I see people, asking for a copy or whatnot, like this time of year or through the winter. I'm like, really, it's not Halloween, but I think that's something I gotta get in my head that it's all right to I can get out there this summer too and see what
yeah,
happens.
awesome, awesome. That's fantastic. And did Canscape or any of the groups previously inform you of the public lending right option that you have with
No, Mark, that was you. I appreciate that.
And
That was a good push for that.
did you manage to get your application in on time before May
Yeah,
1st? Okay, cool.
yeah,
Good stuff. Awesome.
mhm,
So you didn't miss anything because you just published the book in the fall last year. So that
yeah,
was kind of like the first time you could apply anyways. So
yeah,
that's kind of cool because yeah, as an illustrator, I think your dad claims a certain percentage and you claim, or I guess as the combined author, I guess I don't know how that works. I guess you just combine the whole
yeah,
thing, right?
yeah, yeah. We split it up. We had a deal, going into it. So yeah,
So I have to get into this. So we often advise authors, like even if I'm really good friends with people I've co-authored with, like really good friends. But
hmm,
sometimes things change and you're not really good friends. So one
yeah,
of the things I often advise is having a contract. I
yeah,
mean, your dad will always be your dad. I get that.
yeah.
That's not going to change. But do you guys even have a contract? Even you have a friendly relationship, but do you have a contract? about so what
Uh,
happens with the publishing rights if something, happens to one of you? What happens to all that? Like, do you have that ironed out?
yeah, like we talked about that sort of thing. It's not in writing.
Yeah.
Maybe this year, as things are picking up, that will be something that we should
Yeah.
probably look at. But we have like talked about those things. We have a handshake agreement on,
Yeah, of
what
course.
will happen.
Yeah.
But I think like it's important for both of us in terms of like children's literature, at least. I don't want to like work with another, illustrator. Like, you know, a lot of one thing I learned actually submitting to some Canadian publishing houses was the author illustrator duo thing can actually work against you. I thought it would be a benefit,
Yeah, you
but they
thought,
like
hey,
that.
it's all ready to go. All you need to do
Exactly.
is give your thumbs up. But they're like, no, 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 we assign the artist, right? And
Yeah.
that's very common, right?
Yeah, totally. So to have a publishing house that, likes my style of writing and also likes his style of art, it's almost even harder to find. So that's why I think, self-publishing is going to be the way we keep going together on this.
Yeah, I mean, unless Scholastic comes up with a six-figure deal and says, hey, we want to purchase the
That would be
rights, you
great.
might say, well, all right, okay.
Yeah, 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 that would be awesome.
Oh, fair enough. Okay, that's cool. So tell me a little bit about, if you can, tell me a little bit about the young reader book that you guys are working on together.
Yeah, I mean, I get finicky about sharing the details of a story. I don't know if are you
No, no,
like
it's
that?
okay. No, you don't have to. Just that's cool.
Mhm.
Because again, sometimes for me, when I share before it's done, the enthusiasm for the project kind of gets spent in the wrong
Yeah,
direction. Is that
right.
is that one of the reasons you have that?
Yeah, I think so. I think also, yeah, I don't know. I think also I'm, trying to have that sort of, I don't know what it is, to be honest with you. Yeah, maybe it's superstition, honestly. But
Okay, fair enough.
yeah, it's going to be a middle grade story with sort of spot illustrations, the same way you see in like Diary of a Wimpy Kid or The
Right.
Bad Guys, if people are familiar with that. Similar sort of humorous adventure mystery story.
Cool, cool. I love that. And so I think it's important as somebody who writes in this genre that
Hmm.
you're familiar with what's on the market, so that you must
Yeah,
have had to do some research then.
totally. Yeah, I try to read as much lately, especially as much middle grade as I can to sort of get a sense of what's out there and what's popular.
Right.
And I think the best middle grade stories are just as enjoyable for me as they are for a younger reader.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember reading books with my kid when he was
Yeah,
younger, and I loved Diary of the Wimpy Kid. I loved
yeah,
reading them along
yeah,
with him too. Those were
yeah,
kind of fun. It like gave me an insight into stuff that was resonating. So
yes,
that's really amazing.
totally.
Oh wow, cool. So I guess as we get close to the end of the conversation, I am curious to find out. So now that you've done it, now that you've gone through the process, you've published a book,
Mhm.
you're working on that next one. What advice would you give to somebody who was in your shoes, who said, "Hey, I've got this book. Either I've written the story, and or I have it all already illustrated." What advice would you give to them in terms of what to do next, or maybe things you wish you knew?
Yeah, yeah. I think like the perception of what the publishing houses can give you versus what you can do yourself if you're willing to put the work in. I think, I would encourage authors who feel like they have their story to look for those resources where they need them to like make it look more professional and presentable on the shelves. Because I think a lot of times what hurts self-published authors is they're so enthusiastic about getting their story out there as quickly as possible that they're not as focused maybe on those finer details like text art or you know little formatting things. Like it's very important to make sure that if your book's going to be on the shelves next to a professionally published book, you got to make it look as professionally published as you can. So look for those resources, I would say, but don't let that stop you from getting it out there. There's so much you can find online. If you don't, really honestly, going through Fiverr for some of those formatting, little tweaks and, a few of those little final details. It's not that expensive, but even if you can't afford that, there's plenty of information on YouTube to help you really finalize the project and get it out there. And then once it looks professional, once it's ready to go, I would say, get out into the community, find those conferences and events as best you can. Follow people like yourself or other people who have like a lot of knowledge in the indie author space, and figure out what you can do to get your project out there.
Awesome. Great advice. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So is there something that you were hoping that we would talk about that I didn't get a chance to ask you?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think this was this is my first podcast I've done.
I have the honor of interviewing you.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Cool. Very exciting.
Yeah. So it's awesome to hop on here and share the origin story a little bit.
Yeah. That is cool. Awesome. Well, so can you please let my listeners know where they can find you online and where they can find this awesome book as well?
Yeah, you can find this book through Amazon, through Indigo if you're in Canada, Barnes and Noble in the States. But, Amazon's a great way to grab it.
Okay.
And we're based in the GTA, so doing lots of readings and events and stuff as the fall season comes back around this year. And then our next book is A Christmas Story, and that's the next one that's going to hit the shelves. Christmas picture book coming this year. So really excited for that.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. So two seasons back to back right there. So,
yeah, exactly. It'll be a busy stretch of months.
Awesome. And you have a website, or is it just that the books are listed on various retailers?
Yeah. You can check out our website, jjmcfaullbooks.com, or JJ McFaull Books on Instagram is where I'm active for social media.
Awesome. Thank you. And I will have links to those in the show notes at starkreflections.ca.
Awesome.
Jacob, thanks again so much for hanging out with me.
No problem. It was a great time.
I really enjoyed this conversation with Jacob. In particular, I do remember when he showed me the cover of the book. I mean, I almost leapt across the room. It's like, oh my God, I need that book. It's so awesome. Not just because I'm a huge fan of Halloween, but obviously I'm just always looking for great kids books for my beautiful granddaughter. And I love the way that Jacob has collaborated with his father, and they have the JJ McFaull books. Just perfect branding. I just think that is so amazing. That also opens up the possibility of doing offshoots that are not the children's books, like the YA book that Jacob was talking about as well, even though his father will be illustrating it, because it's going to be one of those between young reader and young adult books that has illustrations throughout. But what I want to reflect on the most is the element of finding the right professional. And it kind of goes beyond just, okay, I'm a writer and you're an illustrator and we're going to work together and we're going to make this so fantastic. But just because somebody is an illustrator does not mean that they understand layout, formatting, and design. The principles for illustration may not be the same as the principles for lettering. I know, for example, when I was learning, from watching Marvel comic books, is you have the writer, you have the illustrator, and then you have the inker, and then the colorist, and then you would have the letterer. And all of these different professionals work together to create this right product. So I think I was predisposed just from understanding that from Spider-Man comics back in the day. But it also reminds me of an additional reflection, and this can be true too. You can have a phenomenal illustrator who does beautiful, beautiful art, but they may not have the design principles, particularly when it comes to design for books. That's where you may need one person to do a great illustration and another person to do the cover design. I did that very specifically just a couple years ago for my book, Yippee-Ki-Yay, Mother F, the trivia book about Die Hard. I was not able to license any images from the film to use in the cover of the book. The licensing for, the Disney will not, they basically told me, go away, little boy, when I tried to find out how much it would cost to license an image of, John McClane for the cover, etc. So I was able to license images for the interior of the book. That's fine. And I have to renew the license every 3,000 copies of the book that sells. But for the cover, I had a talented illustrator that I know illustrate basically, what looks like John McClane in the white, bloody, stained T-shirt that is indicative of the Die Hard film. And then I had my cover designer, Juan Pedro, and I gave him the art, gave him the text, and he created the text for it. So again, hiring the right professional to do the right job is so important. And I'm so glad that Jacob and James, that they learned this and that we're willing to share it. So again, over at the starkreflections.ca, you'll see a couple examples of the original cover, and then the cover with the professional lettering done by somebody who that's what they specialize in. So just remember, and it's the same thing would go for a writer, just hiring someone who's a writer, but if they only write, for example, historical fiction, and you're asking them to do a biography or to potentially write military science fiction, that doesn't, because just they're a writer doesn't mean they can write everything. Just because they're a designer, they may focus on or specialize in one thing, or an illustrator, etc. So again, finding the right professional is so important. But that's it for my reflection. I do want to say a huge shout out and thank you to those who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee buddies. And I owe you guys some stuff. I've got some special content that I've recorded that's gonna be delivered to you. But I also, I'm a bit behind in terms, because of the travel I've been doing, in terms of delivering some of the promises that I've made to my patrons. And I know some of you folks have filled out the form, so I'm going to do the random survey, and I'll be reaching out to those of you who've won the opportunity to have a short story narrated by Aaron Fors, as well as the manuscript report as well. So I'll be reaching out to you guys probably in the next week or so for the winners, and we'll be resetting some of those opportunities as well. And I'll post that, of course, over on the Patreon feed with a huge thank you to those who support the podcast financially. It does really mean a lot to me. But you know what also means a lot to me? You listening to this podcast. I do appreciate you listening. I appreciate if you could leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, or better yet, share this episode or any episode that you really enjoyed with someone that you think would find value in it, because that is a great way to support this podcast. But as I mentioned before, that is the end of this episode. And until next week, and until next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.